Hi there. We're just continuing to look over the next 24 days of Advent. Well, we've probably had 5 days now, so the next 19 days of Advent at a chapter a day in Luke's Gospel. There's 24 chapters in Luke's Gospel. They're 24 days, well, 25 you can count Christmas Day, of Advent. So we're looking at Luke chapter 5. If you've not read it, maybe you want to stop pause the video and maybe have a little read. We're actually only going to read right up until verse actually we're going to stop a little bit early actually and stop at verse 15, which might not make sense, but hopefully will make sense when we look at chapter 6. Just a little bit of a recap. First of all, the story has been building of a revelation of who Jesus is. We've started off with the announcement of Gabriel telling Mary that she is going to give birth to a son who's going to be Christ the Lord, the Saviour. Mary has a prophetic word about the kind of God that we serve. And then Zechariah is the father of John the Baptist. And again, he has a prophetic word for both his son and the guy that John, his son, is the forerunner for. We see this God being Jesus, God in human form, born in poverty, ignored, isolated, but yet visited by shepherds. A prophetic word also given over Jesus that he would be a light to the Gentiles and the glory of the people of Israel, but also a sign that many people would speak against and words that would even break his own mother's heart. We see Jesus being baptized and commissioned, and a voice from heaven saying, "You are my own dear son, with whom I'm well pleased." And then we saw Jesus being tempted in the desert before coming out, preaching and teaching and doing miracles of healing and deliverance. And at the heart of that, Jesus said that he was the fulfillment of Isaiah 61, that idea of the one who comes to bind up the brokenhearted, the one who proclaims freedom to the captive and recovery of sight to the blind, the one who declares the year of the Lord's splendor, the one who takes what is broken and destroyed and makes it whole, the restorer, the redeemer, and the mender. His first sermon was so controversial that the people of Nazareth nearly threw him over a cliff because they couldn't believe that the Messiah, God's Holy One, could have come from their town. In fact, someone says elsewhere in the start of John's Gospel, nothing good can come from Nazareth. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Xenophobia and racism is nothing new. Stereotyping and prejudice existed then and it exists now too. So they couldn't believe it. And now we see Jesus is starting his ministry. He's preaching, he's teaching, he's healing. And now we see him calling his first disciples. In chapter 5, we see, first of all, he's preaching, and then the crowd is so big that he ends up preaching from a boat. And he says this to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch." When I was at college, I was part of a prayer triplet. I had two really close mates called Simon, which is always really confusing. One was a guy called Simon Turner, and one was a guy called Simon Cartwright. Simon Cartwright was the guy I was in my prayer triplet with, who was a very different character from Simon Turner. I remember the first conversation I had with Simon was about this passage, and he said this has been a word for him, where Jesus said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let your nets down for the catch." That call of God to say, go deeper and risk it all on Jesus. I've often thought of that passage, that often Jesus is saying to each one of us, push out into deeper water and let down your nets for a catch. Get out your comfort zone. Get out of the familiar. Get out of where we feel safe and comfortable and in control. Get out where we have no control and just say, God, it's over to you. If you don't show up, we're stuffed. Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and we haven't caught a thing." He also could legitimately say, "You're a carpenter, I'm a fisherman. What do you know about catching fish?" But he says this, and I'm not sure if he's been sarcastic or faithful. He says, "But because you say so, I will let my nets down." I like to think he's being faithful. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break, and they signaled the other boats to come and help them. And the boats were so full, they began to sink. And then Simon Peter fell down before Jesus and said, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." This little passage also, right at the start of Luke's Gospel, really also echoes with me. I remember when I came back to faith on Easter Day, 1996, 7, something like that. I was sat in church. I was there in slightly begrudgingly, really. I'd sort of said I'd go to someone's church, and I eventually gave in and went. And I remember hearing the preacher say something, but before that, a few months earlier, in fact, in September before that, I'd had a conversation with a friend of mine called Sam Wood, and she had died really suddenly. And the last conversation I'd had with her in September was she was having a fag outside the laundry shop that was opposite the church where my dad was vicar and I used to go to. And she said, "Are you still going along to church?" And I made some sort of, "Yeah, I am. But to be honest," I said, "I'd rather find out about God when I'm 40 or 50 and settle down to be boring." Because my thinking was, and it was bad thinking at the time, and very ageist too, was actually I believed Jesus was real. I believed it was all true, but I wanted to have fun now. I wanted salvation, but I didn't want discipleship. Or if I did want discipleship, it was only really to keep God happy so I might get what I want. It wasn't a sort of wholehearted thing. Anyway, that was the last conversation I ever had with Sam because she died really suddenly, only a couple of weeks later. Anyway, fast forward now to Easter Day, that same year. And the preacher then said, maybe someone here has said something like, "I'd like to find out about God when I'm 40 or 50 and settle down to be boring." And he made it as a sort of a throwaway line, a bit of a joke, a bit of a gag. And literally my skin went up in goosebumps. There's a phrase in the Bible called the fear of the Lord. And that's something I experienced then. I'd always believed God was real. I always believed in Jesus. But at that moment, I realized afresh that God was real, was on my case. And it broke me. It still breaks me now, actually. And that evening, I went forward. The guy kind of called anyone who wanted to become a Christian up to the front, and I hate going up the front. Well, in those days, I hated going up the front for things. Now now I actually prefer sitting in the back because I'm always at the front. But yeah, I got called up the front, because he made an appeal, and I prayed a prayer, and I remember just saying something like, "Jesus, I want to follow you, and I want to do it properly. I want to do it. Yeah, I want to be fully in, not half in, half out, whatever." And it was a prayer that changed my life. But what came from that was that moment when I always believed God was real. But there was that moment when His power, His holiness, His presence, His reality, I guess, just stopped me in my tracks, and I just realised that I just couldn't live one foot in the world, one foot in the church. I had to make my mind up. Almost in the Bible, it says in the book of Kings with Elijah speaking, if Baal is God, follow him. But if Yahweh is God, follow him. That was my moment when I was like, Jesus, I'm going to follow you for the rest of my life. I've not always got it right, but it's certainly been that change of direction. And that seems to be what Simon has there when he says, go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. When he realized the awesomeness, the power of God, when he realized that who he was stood before, he realized that he is fallen, he's fallible, he's broken, and actually that, almost that, God, what do you want with me? Isaiah says something similar. He says, he sees the glory of God and he says, woe to me, for I am undone. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live amongst a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the Lord. My eyes have seen the Lord. At that moment, he realized his need of God. The fear of God almost captured him. Now, I'm not really into this phrase, the fear of God. In fact, it's a phrase I actively dislike, really, because I believe ultimately that perfect love casts out all fear. But I think sometimes we do need those moments where suddenly we realize afresh it is real and these choices we make matter. And that was my moment. That seems to be the moment that Simon has, where he suddenly realized it's real and I need to respond to this. He realized his sin. But interestingly, Jesus says to him, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. In other words, he said, don't be afraid. I want you to join me. And I've got a task and a calling on your life. That's what Jesus says to us when we suddenly like, oh, wow, you're God, you're real and you're awesome and you're powerful and you're magnificent and you're holy and you're mighty and you're amazing. Jesus says, do not be afraid. I've got a job for you. I've got a calling on your life. So I suppose my prayer is for all of us that we both get that fear of God moment where we're like, wow, God, you're real and you're awesome. And I just have to just say, I surrender. You're in charge. But then we also need to hear the voice of Jesus, the one of Jesus who is the embodiment of perfect love, saying, do not be afraid. I've got a job for you. And then it says this. So they pulled up their boats. That would be Simon, Andrew, James, John. They left everything and followed him. They encounter Jesus. He does something amazing. And they follow him for the rest of their lives. That moment, that encounter with Jesus that changed everything. And then on to the next little section before we stop. When Jesus is in one of the towns, a man came to him who was covered in leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Now, leprosy was almost a bit like the AIDS virus in the social thinking of that time. There was a lot of paranoia, a lot of prejudice. Those who had leprosy were treated really, really badly. Someone now says that in our society, paedophiles are the new lepers. People who are just given, what's the word? Reviled, hated, feared. And yet Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man and said, I am willing, he said, be clean. And immediately the man's leprosy left him. So here, as we see, there's a gradual picture of who Jesus is. We see him as the one who has authority over the demonic. He beats Satan in resisting temptation. He preaches with authority. He casts out demons. He heals people. He has power over nature and even fish. And he casts and he cleanses the leper. The thing is, Jesus touches those who no one else would touch. This would be shocking. This would be headline news. People would be like, I can't believe he's just done that. He has touched a leper. But interestingly, what happens? Jesus isn't contaminated by touching the leper. The leper is healed because Jesus touched him. So however messed up you feel, or however messed up I feel, I sometimes come before God and I feel incredibly guilty about all sorts of things that I've done wrong. I sometimes know that I've stuffed up. But I know that when I come to Jesus and I say, I need your forgiveness, Jesus reaches out and touches us and cleanses us, and our sin is gone. Jesus is always willing to come, to cleanse, to heal, to restore. And sometimes we feel, I'm too messy. It's what Peter said as well. Get away from me. I'm a sinful man. Sometimes we think God can't be interested in me because I've done X, or I've done Y, or I haven't done this, or I should have done that, or there's this in my past, or I've got this problem, or whatever it is, whatever it is, that's the thing in your life. We've all got, what is it they say? Every saint has a past and every sinner a future. Whatever it is, we can come to Jesus and say, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And we know that Jesus will touch us. Doesn't always mean that the cleansing journey is instant and easy sometimes. Sometimes God walks us through some very difficult things. But we know that whenever we come to Jesus, he always, always reaches out to us. And he never says, you're too messy, you're too dirty, you're too broken for me. He always says, I am willing. Let's sort this out together. I am willing. There's a great line. I'm not always a great fan of liturgy, but there's a great line in one of the liturgical Eucharistic prayers that says, he touched untouchables with love and washed the guilty clean. Jesus healed that leper. And then it says in verse 15, yet the news spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to that lonely places, and prayed. Here we see Jesus giving out, preaching and healing, delivering, doing so many amazing things. But at the heart of it all is, I believe, verse 16. It all stems from his relationship with the Father. Yes, he does have authority over sickness. Yes, he does have authority over the demonic. Yes, he does have authority over the natural world. But that is because that he is rooted deeply in God and operating in obedience, filled with the Holy Spirit, working, allowing God to work through him. It's Jesus' relationship with God that is the catalyst for Jesus' ministry. And amazingly, I believe it's our relationship with God that is the catalyst for all that we do. Yeah, there's all these great stories of Jesus doing healings and all that sort of stuff. And later on in the Gospels, we see the disciples doing that. But it's not actually about the signs and the wonders. Actually, it stems from Jesus withdrawing and spending time on his own, praying to his Father. So we see we see in this passage, we see the fear of God. And then Jesus saying, do not be afraid. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but also perfect love casts out fear. We also see that however grotty, messed up and broken we are, we know that Jesus is willing to reach out to us. Jesus will never recoil from you and will touch us. And then we realize that the source of Jesus's power and might stems from the depth of his relationship with God, which is actually the source of our life source, is our relationship with God, from which who we are can flow. We may mess up, we may be broken, we may have all sorts of things in our lives, but God is a God who sorts stuff out and says, come to me, all who are troubled and heavy laden, and I will refresh you. Maybe today you need to withdraw to a lonely place, to a quiet place, and have a pray. Encounter this God, the God that in one sense is awesome and mighty, but also whose perfect love casts out fear. And whatever it is that we've done that maybe pushes us away from God, know that he reaches out to you and says, I am willing and I love you.